Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 25a, starting at the top of the page, with the words Lo Adun Karen Mikaren. Will not derive an inference with regard to goring from a different case of goring. I will instead derive an inference with regard to goring from trampling, and if in a place where the Torah was lenient with regard to damage classified as eating and trampling, specifically in the public domain, as the owner is exempt from liability, nevertheless, the Torah was strict with regard to damage classified as goring, requiring him to pay half the cost of the damage. Then, in a place where the Torah was strict with regard to damage classified as eating and trampling, specifically on the property of the injured party, as the animal's owner is obligated to pay the full cost of the damage. Is it not right that we should be equally strict with regard to damage classified as goring and require payment of the full cost of the damage in this case as well? The rabbis said to him here as well, it is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from an a fortiori inference to be like its source. In Hebrew, this is known as, referred to as Dayo Lavo Min Hadin Lios Kanidon. It is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from a Kal V'chomer inference to be like its source. And therefore, just as one is liable to pay half the cost of damage classified as goring in the public domain, so too for damage classified as goring on the property of the injured, he will pay half. You can't learn not to pay more than half. If you pay half in this place, for sure in this place, but not more than that. Okay. That is... Okay, that's the Mishnah. Gemara. And it is true that Rabbi Tarfon does not accept the principle of Dayo. Rabbi Tarfon less le Dayo. It is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from an a fortiori inference to be like its source, but that cannot be. As the principle that begins with it is sufficient is an aspect of Torah law, as it is taught in a Braita. The sages said that one of the ways in which the Torah may be interpreted is by an a fortiori inference. How is this so? It is written in Numbers 12:14, and the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not hide in shame for 7 days? And this is talking about the case of when Miriam and Aaron, Miriam spoke Lashon Hara to Aharon, about Moses, according to the Torah, and she was punished because of it. Let her be shut up 7 days outside the camp, and after that she shall be brought in again. And therefore, using it an a fortiori inference, it can be derived that if the divine presence reprimanded her, she should hide in shame for 14 days. Why was Miriam banished for only 7 days? Rather, it is because it is sufficient that the conclusion that emerged from an a fortiori inference, I don't know where they came up with 14 days. I mean, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not hide in shame for 7 days? Then is it not a Kal V'chomer that that's interesting. They're differentiating between the Shechina and the father. Kal V'chomer l'Shechina arba asar. Why? Why 14? Why do they say automatically double? That's a good question. Why not one more or two more? Why exactly double? That's a tough one. That's a real tough one. But let's continue, because if we get too caught up on ideas, we're going to lose out on time. We have 15 minutes. Spent a little bit too long on this pondering, but sometimes these questions really get to you, you know? Anyway, the point is that you can't learn more from the thing you learn from. So basically, why was Miriam banished for only 7 days? Rather, it is because sufficient for the conclusion that emerged from the a fortiori inference to be like the source of the inference. Consequently, this principle is mandated by the Torah itself. So therefore, we can't say. So they were wondering, well, how is it that Rabbi Tarfon doesn't hold of this? The Gemara answers, when Rabbi Tarfon does not accept the principle, it is sufficient. It is where the principle completely refutes the a fortiori inference, leaving no halacha derived from it. But where it does not completely refute the a fortiori inference, Rabbi Tarfon accepts the principle. It is sufficient. Consequently, there, with regard to Miriam, the 7 days during which she deserved to be banished from the camp due to the rebuke of the divine presence, were not written, so the a fortiori inference came and brought those days plus additional days, adding up to a total of 14. And then the principle is sufficient, came and removed 7 days and left 7 days intact. Consequently, the a fortiori inference was effective. You know what? I think that's going to be questions to the record number 6, I think. Consequently, the a fortiori inference was ineffective with regard to the 7 days during which she was banished from the camp. But here, payment for half the cost of the damage is written explicitly in the Torah with regard to the halacha of goring in the public domain. And the a fortiori inference comes and brings an additional payment for half the cost of the damage, forming a payment of the full cost of the damage. If you interpret the halacha employing the principle, it is sufficient to reduce the payment to half the cost of the damage. This completely refutes the a fortiori inference, as no halacha would be derived from the inference. The initial payment for half the cost of the damage was written explicitly in the Torah. Consequently, in this case, Rabbi Tarfon does not employ the principle of Dio. Okay, let's continue. The Rabbanan, 7-minute warning. Hold on. 8 plus 7 is 15. Okay, so 7-minute warning and counting. Okay, so 8:47. Okay. Rabbanan Shiva Nishchina Kesivi Tisagar Shivas Yamim. The Gemara asks, how do the rabbis understand this matter? How do they respond to Rabbi Tarfon's reasoning? The Gemara answers, in their opinion, the 7 days during which Miriam had to be banished due to the reprimand she received from the divine presence are in fact written in the Torah. Let her be shut up 7 days. This indicates that the a fortiori inference is not required to teach the halacha of the 7 days she was banished, as it would have added only extra 7 days. This means that according to the rabbis, there is a source in the Torah that the principle it is sufficient is employed, even when it refutes the Kal V'chomer inference completely. Rabbi Tarfon, who Tisger, the Gemara asks, and what would Rabbi Tarfon say about that reasoning? The Gemara answers, he would say that this verse, let her be shut up 7 days, is necessary to teach that the basic fact that we interpret the halacha according to the principle it is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from an a fortiori inference to be like its source. Rabbanan Kasiv Krachlin Vitisagar Miriam Rabbi Tarfon Ahuda Filu Alman Darshin Andayo ולא תאמר לך משום כבודו של משה, אבל בעלמא לא כמשמלן. The Gemara asks, and what would the rabbis say in response? The Gemara answers, they would point out that a different verse is written about Miriam, and Miriam was shut up outside the camp 7 days. Numbers 12:15. The Gemara asks, and how would Rabbi Tarfon respond to that? The Gemara answers that that verse teaches that we interpret the halacha according to the principle it is sufficient, even generally, and not only in this specific case. And this point is necessary so that you do not say here the principle is sufficient, is employed due to respect for Moses, but generally that is not done. This verse therefore teaches us that this is not so. Rav Papa said to Abaya is the fundamental principle. Rav Papa said to Abaya is the fundamental principle. It is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from an a fortiori inference to be like the source, actually accepted by all authorities. But there is this Tana who does not accept the halacha in accordance with the principle it is sufficient, even though it is a case where the principle does not refute the a fortiori inference completely, as it is taught in a Braita. From where is it derived that the semen of a man who experiences gonorrhea-like discharge, zav, imparts ritual impurity by someone carrying it as well as someone coming into contact with it, just as the actual gonorrhea-like discharge does? It is a logical derivation from an a fortiori inference, just as spittle, which is ritually pure when coming from a person who is ritually pure, is impure when coming from someone like a zav who is impure. Is it not logical that semen, which is impure when coming from someone who is pure, should be impure when coming from someone who is impure? It's a simple kal v'chomer idea. And the Tana brings this derivation and applies it whether discussing ritual impurity imparted by contact or whether discussing impurity imparted by carrying. And why is this the case? Let us say an a fortiori inference is ineffective in teaching that the semen of a zav imparts ritual impurity by contact alone, as is the halacha with regard to semen of a pure man. And the principle it is sufficient is effective by limiting the scope of the a fortiori inference to exclude the semen of a zav from imparting ritual impurity by carrying, since the Tana does not formulate his derivation in this matter. It appears that he rejects the principle it is sufficient in all situations. And if you would say that the a fortiori inference was not necessary to teach that the seminal mission of the zav imparts ritual impurity by contact, as is certainly no less impure than if it had come from a man who was pure, so the inference was necessary only to teach that the semen of a zav imparts impurity by carrying. This is not correct. In fact, it was necessary to teach this point, as it may enter your mind to say that since it is written in the verse, if there be among you any man that is not clean because of something that happens to him by night, Deuteronomy 23:11, this means that a seminal mission is ritually impure if it came from someone who had something happen to him, and this causes him to experience the emission. But the verse is excluding this zav who did not have something happen to him to cause him to experience the emission, but rather another matter. In other words, his gonorrhea-like condition caused him to experience the emission. Consequently, it teaches that this is incorrect. See where we are in time? We have 1 more minute. Okay. Abaya responded in the verse, something that happens to him at night. Is it also written, but not another matter? This limiting clause is not written in the verse, and therefore the halacha that the semen of zav imparts ritual impurity by contact can be understood from the explicit verse in the Torah, and there is no need to derive it from a kal v'chomer inference. Therefore, the only function of the a fortiori inference is to teach the halacha that the semen of zav imparts impurity by carrying. Applying the principle it is sufficient would refute the a fortiori inference completely, so there is no proof that the Tana would apply the principle in all circumstances. We shall pick it up on Daf B, 25b.